Started. So today's program is the security industry and public safety working together. Ppvr, the Partnership for Priority Verified Alarm Response. As we're all aware, major changes are underway for both public safety and the security industry. These changes represent both challenges and opportunities for your business. Today, we're going to learn how Ppvr and other organizations are working to develop standards, technology, and processes that will tie you into the new NG 911 public safety ecosystem and protect your customers. Our speaker is going to go over who Ppvr is and how they actually work with public safety through verification, false alarm reduction, and first responder safety. We'll touch on AVS-01 and other critical standards. We'll also touch on NG 911, FirstNet, and other key technologies. Partners like some of these names, I know I'm gonna mess them all up. So partners like Intrado, RapidDeploy, and RapidSOS. And also touch on communication and coordination with public safety. So our speaker today is Tom Nakatani. Did I get that right?
Yeah, pretty close.
All right. Who is ADT's Vice President of IT, Customer Monitoring Technology, and is also President of Ppvr. Tom has been with ADT Security Services for over 30 years. And currently holds the position of Vice President of Customer Monitoring Technology. In his role, he is responsible for monitoring platforms and services across all of ADT's centers and business lines. Prior to this role, Tom held positions responsible for global monitoring strategy, corporate policies and procedures, workforce management and reporting, M&A, integration, centralized customer data management, and video product deployment. He's led teams that have implemented ADT's current monitoring and business operation environments, consolidated over 60 central stations, and developed a number of key IT applications. Tom is very active in the industry, and as I said, is the current president of Ppvr, sits on the board of the Security Industry Association, and works very closely with TMA, the Monitoring Association, Underwriters Laboratory, and several public safety organizations. So with that said, that's a big build up there. So
it is.
We're setting you up for a big thing here. So with that said, Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to this board and the organization. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here. I'm going to bring up the title slide of my presentation while we're talking. As mentioned, that's a big bio that we.
Oh,
whoops.
Where'd he go? Well, that was quick.
You know, I don't sing very well.
Oh.
I think there was a click that wasn't the right click.
Whoops.
Watch this. I can fix it.
Sorry about that. They really shouldn't put that leave meeting icon.
I know.
Right next to the start presentation.
Right next to the. Yeah. We can share or we can leave. Click.
Yes.
See you later.
Well, having got that out of the way, let me get this presentation up.
There we go.
Okay, you see that okay? All right, now we are in presentation mode.
Perfect.
As mentioned, a lot of this will be around discussions around Ppvr. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the organization itself and why it's there. But as noted, I'm the current president of Ppvr. My term technically expires very shortly, but the Ppvr organization was started right with a number of people that were actually part of TMA, and it split off because there was a discussion going on during the time Ppvr was created. This is probably 10 years ago now, right? Where it was very controversial about alarm verification, right? There was a large contingent of alarm industry folks, and maybe they still feel this way, that verification, right, and trying to set up maybe a multi-tier system that acknowledged that a verified alarm is different from an unverified alarm, right? And there was a lot of concern about what that meant for our customer base. Would people perceive that as a negative if they had like an older type of system that didn't allow for verification, right, at least according to more modern standards? But Ppvr was founded because of that disagreement, to be honest. It was done before my time, but it was created because the membership of Ppvr, including public safety, felt so strongly that verified alarms were the wave of the future, right? And they were kind of ahead of the time, but the Ppvr mission was created around promoting the value of verification and the validation of alarms during the emergency response process, using whatever technologies and processes were available and best practices, right? So we didn't want to limit this to just video or just a specific technology. Sonitrol is a huge part of the membership, for example, right? So there's audio technologies involved, but also the act of verification itself. Over the years, the industry has definitely implemented a lot of efforts to attempt to verify, right? And reduce false alarms. There's 7 and 5 day test periods. There's things like enhanced call verification. There's false alarm reduction programs, but all those efforts have been incremental, right? We've been building up on these things, but we know that there's been a big transition in terms of the technologies available to us. And on the other side of the house, public safety has been implementing a lot of ordinances, right? I'm pretty sure I can't think of a major city now that doesn't have some type of permitting requirement in place, right? Some type of permits or install requirements around alarms. All of these things have been put in place, with the most extreme forms being non-response, right? Non-response being the police departments won't respond without somebody literally on site acknowledging that something has occurred, right? That there's a verified alarm. So Ppvr is an interesting organization because it's unique in the sense that it brought together public safety and the alarm industry. We have absolutely made it a mandate that a large portion of the board, right, 30 to 50% of the board is actually comprised of members of public safety. And one of my efforts as president was to bring fire into that. We started off this discussion talking about fire, right? and so a lot of the low-hanging fruit for our industry is around burglar alarms, but I absolutely believe a lot of the efforts that I'll be talking about also are applicable and important to the fire side of the house, right? But anyway, it's become very clear to me as I've worked with Ppvr, and we've been able to fine tune on some of these objectives. The very first thing that I hear from our public safety counterparts is when they talk about, like, why do you want more information? How do you want to deal with alarms? What's driving you? Is improving first responder safety. That's first. I almost never get a different answer, right? Around like what is important to you. They want to make sure that they're protecting the men and women that are in those units that are responding to alarms or emergency requests for service. So the way we can help do that, by the way, is to provide them with better information. They want that information and they're desperately trying to get this data, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more. And when we talk about the information, they don't want every piece of information, right? Just like our monitoring centers don't have the ability to go through and watch 17 minutes of video, they absolutely don't have that ability either, right? So they want actionable information. They want to know what it is, the key elements of what it is that they need to understand to make decisions around, like, what is the situation? What kind of units should they send? How many units should they send, right? All those types of things go into that, using resources more effectively. So Ppvr looks at it in several different ways around people, process, and technology, a very common way of looking at things. But I'll be detailing some of those things in the coming slides. So I'll just kind of move on from this. This is the timeline of Ppvr. You can see I'm the 5th president there. This is more of an internal thing, but you can see that Ppvr has been very busy over its lifetime in working to develop standards, create training materials, working with various organizations like SEAC, working on verification standards. I'm really proud of the history of Ppvr. It's a small group. The board itself maybe very similar to yours, is a working group, right? We meet twice a month as opposed to quarterly, say, or something like what may be more typical of boards. And we absolutely work. It's a working board, right? We write articles, we participate in standards bodies, we share information. It's very active. So it's a fun group of people to work with. These are some of the members of Ppvr. You can see there's a lot of companies, and we're going to try to build up on the public safety side. On the right side, this is just kind of like an eye chart. And this is the current board, right? I'll just move through these fairly quickly, but we have representation from a number of large companies and and small regional ones. Rob Baxter, I'll talk about him and his company. They have a very interesting small company and the way they approach verification. We also have members of public safety. At least half or close to half of this board is comprised of active members of public safety, whether from fire or police. And John Chiaramonte is the president of consulting services at an organization called MCP. They do consulting for public safety. So it's a really experienced and knowledgeable board. All right. So talking about the Ppvar strategy and some of the details. One of the key areas that we feel is important is talking about standards and verification, right? It's hard to talk with our counterparts in public safety when we don't speak the same language. What I would tell you that's really interesting is that on the public safety side, they have very little understanding of how the alarm industry actually works, what a panel does, how it goes through our central station, and what it does, right? Just as we may or may not have a lot of experience with how 911 centers operate. That's been one of the more interesting points that happens on this board, is that the alarm industry and public safety side often have really great discussions around like what is actually happening. What does an alarm agent do with the burglar alarm before they actually call the police department? Or they don't actually know, right? And so we've identified that as a key area of training and opportunity, right? Of communication and education, which is one of our pillars. But in this sense, when we talk about the standards, there's multiple standards that the alarm industry has implemented, right? CSV01 is a TMA ANSI standard around verification processes for alarms. CP01 is a CIA standard, right, around false alarm reduction programming practices for control panels, right? It's a control panel 01 for a standard. So the alarm industry has been working for years on this. And some of the next steps that we believe that are important are around a combination of the two, right? How does the security industry communicate properly with public safety? So I've got a whole section on the standard called alarm. Actually, they changed it to validation scoring, right? Not verification. We're being very careful about language, but alarm validation scoring is around establishing a confidence level for alarms. And again, I've got multiple slides on this, so I'll dive into that. But we're working together with public safety to develop the standard. It's currently with TMA, which is an actual ANSI standards making organization, and it's very close to coming up for an initial vote, right? So they've got the draft written, language is being done. I can probably talk about that for quite a while, but I'll show you some of the slides coming up. We think it's also important from a Ppvr perspective to work closely with the other associations, and most importantly, the public safety side of the house has a lot of organizations themselves, right? I was really surprised, right? In my mind, I thought there was, IACP and these organizations that are out there that run at a national level. It's very structured. Well, I will tell you guys, the 911 and public safety side of the house has just as many organizations and just as fractured as the security industry. It's crazy, right? We needed to hire a company to help us navigate that, right? There's NENA, which is the National Emergency Number Association, and APCO, right? And which are two really big organizations related to 911 centers. APCO is more for the individuals. I would liken that to as is on our side, where you can get an individual membership. And NENA is more like TMA, right? Where you join as a 911 center organization. But there's ICERT, which is like a technology organization. There is IACP, there's National Sheriff's Association, there's like local state organizations. It's truly like again, I would liken it to the alarm industry, right? With CIA, with ESA, with SEAC and TMA, right? There's just a bunch of organizations kind of working in this space. All of them have kind of a space that they work inside of, but we need to work more closely with those companies, with those specific entities, and with the organizations that they're part of to get our message across, right? So we think that Ppvr is in a unique position, again, with our public safety membership to help facilitate those conversations, right? We have some great board members. We're going to become a lot more active with the implementation of ABS-01. We think that's going to be a triggering point for a marketing blitz, right? For us to be able to talk with public safety. So part of that is just very standard stuff, increasing our visibility at trade shows, encouraging membership among public safety, working closely, particularly with TMA, right, to develop standards, since a lot of the communications happens between the monitoring center and the 911 centers that they're transmitting the alarm to. And gosh, I've already moved into the slide. I probably talked about everything on this in terms of communication and outreach, right? One was kind of an internal one. So I want to talk a little bit about ABS-01. These are slides that I think are very important because it talks a little bit about why we're doing this and the use case behind it, right? So monitored customers expect a police response. The foundation of our industry, right, is installing an alarm panel, and traditionally those connect to some type of central station. That central station processes the alarm and sends it over in terms of a request for service or a dispatch, whatever you want to call it from our side, over to a 911 center or to a first responder. This process has not changed in decades, right? A lot of us have probably been in the industry for a long time, but that very foundational process is in place. It has not changed. It's a good process, right? It's well proven, but that process also leads us to the 98% false alarms, right? We pulled that statistic from the IACP to kind of keep it neutral. That's a reality we all deal with. We were talking a little bit about that. Again, the harsh way to put that is like, I feel like a lot of times our alarms are just above a car alarm, right? In terms of priority. We've seen this in terms of the ordinances. We've seen this in terms of efforts to reduce false alarms. But with everything that we've done as an industry over the years, we are still at 98%, right? And I think that the numbers will prove that out if we continue to pull some statistics. The other thing that we don't talk about is that 70% of agent outbound calls go unanswered, right? I don't know about everyone on this call personally, but I don't usually answer my cell phone anymore, right? Unless it comes up with a name from my contact list already. I think that's true of almost everybody. Like there's too many unsolicited calls. If I see an unknown number or just a number that doesn't come up, I just ignore it. I let it go to voicemail, right? And I look at texts more frequently. So we think that there's a change that needs to happen in the way we communicate with our customers, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But those two statistics combined, because of our dependence on phone calls, right? This whole process depends on phone calls to the premises, phone calls to the call list, phone calls to the 911 center. It's a very manual process. And when we start calling that call list, it doesn't get picked up. All right. So we need to look at how can we change that dynamic, because the fact that we can't reach anybody means that our default of dispatching the police results in more false alarms, right? It's just kind of a bad cycle that we're inside of.
Is that a statistic that initially when verification calls came into existence, they were doing better, but because of the abuses of, like you said, nuisance calls, that number is now kind of gone back the other way? Is that trend seeing, or? We haven't,
I would say just anecdotally, as people have become more and more used to text messaging, right? and kind of the social media ways of interacting, that the voice calls have become less and less important. So when ECV was implemented, we were still primarily in a phone world and we were getting good response. But today, when we look at it, like our internal statistics are probably 68%. I've talked to other alarm companies that are 73%. That's where we kind of came out with the 70% of calls go unanswered, right? So any of your centrals that are doing this, unless you have an extraordinarily disciplined customer base, right, is probably going to see something very similar. People literally are just not answering their phone anymore, right? They might call back afterwards after listening to a voicemail, but they just aren't doing it. So text messaging and apps are probably the answer to that. And I've got some really interesting numbers to kind of support that. But AVSO1 is kind of based upon a very well-established process, right? So most of us have probably heard about Onstar. It's a vehicle reporting system now owned by General Motors, but they've been in place for decades now. And for decades, they've been working with public safety to refine the way the information that's provided to public safety. And this has become so effective with them that they will literally change their response policies now. So if you're in an OnStar enabled vehicle and they report that there is a high likelihood of severe injury, they will literally send a helicopter instead of an ambulance, and they will route you to a critical trauma center as opposed to, say, a local clinic, right? They have incorporated this information. So we know that we can do this. And this is a real example, right? You can see the types of information that they send. So it's not just a high level, high, medium, or low probability of severe injury. They send these pieces of information, right? The difference or the impact speed, where seatbelts in use, whether multiple impacts, rollover, injury, right? And that kind of results in that, so that this is what we mean by actionable information. We absolutely feel, right, that when you look at what this looks like by the way, this is a very fancy way. Most of OnStar is still done by phone calls, but this is where they're moving toward, right? Where they want to be able to show a screen like this to the public safety agencies that show here's where we are on the map, and all that same information you saw along with driver and vehicle information just shows right up to the 911 center, and they can send that to the responding unit. Some of the interesting sidebars to this that I'll add in just for color is that vehicle type is very important, because with electric vehicles now, the types of tools that, say, a fire department needs to use, they can't just cut into a vehicle, because you can cut into a battery now, right? or a cable that carries a lot of power. So there's all sorts of manuals that they use to say, what is safe for me to try to extricate somebody from a bad accident, right? And so these are things that we don't really think about that are really, really important to public safety. So compare that to what we currently transmit, right? When we call a police agency or a 911 center, it's just like, this is my alarm company, here's the address of the customer, and I've got a zone 3 burglar alarm coming from the front door. Do you have any other information? No, we haven't been able to contact the customer, right? and that's literally what they're responding to, and what our industry is based off of right now. We know we can do a lot better than that, right? So having said that, AVSO1, the alarm validation score, right? I got the proper terminology, is going to take that model that OnStar has built. And by the way, it's a very popular model too. When we talk with public safety and we ask what is one of the better programs you've seen, OnStar by far is like the most common answer. They're like, they did a fantastic job. They talked to us. They explained what they were going to be doing. They sent us training CDs. They had dedicated agents that we can call if we had questions about this, right? They really established what a lot of the agencies consider as a gold standard of deployment of something like this, right? So we think we want to model off of that and the success that they have, right? And the fact that 20 years after they were deployed, that public safety is still talking about how good of a deployment that was is amazing, right? So having a reference like that, we believe that the alarm event scoring categories are going to be very similar. And TMA is very close to defining what this looks like right now. So you can see that on the left side, there's a lot of data. We know, especially with a modern system, that there's a tremendous amount of information that we have that we never talk to the police about, or don't even have the ability to do this. You look at the categories, they're going to mirror to some extent what we just saw with OnStar, right? We'll have a high, call it increased or elevated, right? And low confidence. Low confidence being the default, right? That's kind of what we have, the one zone trip with no verification done, right? That we're not ever saying we don't contact the police, but we're just going to tell this is a standard or low confidence alarm score, right? That we're communicating, because we don't have any collaborating information. And category 0 was something that we're kind of working toward, which is that if we can confirm through our information that we have available that it's a false alarm, that we never contact them, right? Because I would tell you internally, we scrub something like 85% of the alarms that we get before we notify the police. And even with that, then we still end up with a 98% false alarm rate, right? it's a lot of work that we're doing. But what we believe, and this is being finalized right now, is that the blue category 1, right? And by the way, they're not going to say low, increase, high. We might just even leave them. Some of the feedback we're getting from public safety is just tell us category 1, 2, or 3, right? And then we'll map that on our own side to what we want to implement in terms of their process, right? To respond to those. But category 1 would be just standard. Category 2, we think is going to be person is present, right? Because that person being present is a fairly easily defined kind of standard that we can monitor against. And if a person is there and confirmed to be there, the police will absolutely respond differently, right? So just as on one side, there's like a criminal and they're concerned about that. On the other side, they're terrified of like a homeowner being at the location, maybe with their own weapon, right, that they're using to investigate their alarm and the police intruding, right? We've heard the horror stories of that and what can occur. And then high confidence is we're cautious about using the term crime in progress, but there's going to be some obvious things where a customer verifies that says, I want police response. They can do that through their app or whatever mechanism that they have. We have eyewitness accounts, or that maybe we have enough video or audio or other collaborating information where we say we feel there's a crime in progress, right? And very likely the police will respond with like lights and sirens at that point. So along with that information, right, the basic categories of information, you can see how this is going to change the way police respond to alarms. Dallas, that we like to use it as example, has published on their website that they have 5 categories of response. An unverified response is category 4, which is literally just above car alarm, right? And has a 60-minute response time level that they've set. So they give themselves an hour. It's broadcast and file, right? We've heard that term a lot with police agencies. Category 2 is a verified alarm. That's the opposite. That's literally under shots fired, right? And they have a 12-minute response service level for verified alarms. But you know what? Because it's not been defined, it's interesting talking with the public safety side. They're like, we don't have any alarms that come in under category 2, right? Or it's very rare. So with this type of information, our alarms could be coming in at category 2 and not the default of category 4. And you can see how important that is in communicating with your customers and others, right, about how public safety responds to the alarms that are coming in. It's really, really kind of an interesting place that we're finding ourselves, right? So I've got some appendix slides if you want to share the slides afterwards where we're talking about the types of information. So just as there's these kind of supplemental pieces of information that could be sent, we'd love to be able to, what we're trying to identify with public safety is like, look, if AVSO1 comes back and says, here's the equivalent of injury severity confidence, right? That there's a confidence that there's a crime occurring there, or there's just people there. What are the types of information do you feel are important, right? It could be vicious animals on site. It could be weapon identified. It could be multiple zones. We don't know what that looks like quite yet, but we're going to be sending more than just the information that you see about a category, right? We'd love to be able to send them a few key pieces of actionable information that public safety can use. This will translate to a different set of criteria for fire, for example, and medical, but we think that this will truly be transformative, right, to the way we communicate with public safety and the way they respond to us. So really exciting stuff. That's why you'll hear us talking a lot about AVSO1 and what it means to public safety and the security industry. It really ties us into what public safety is trying to build with NG911 and the ability to kind of tie data and voice together. And by the way, I should add, this whole process has been built to support our existing methods of calling, right? So I don't have to have this fancy screen to be able to call the police, right? If my central station is just still doing phone calls or the police don't have the appropriate technology on their side, I can call them and just read them the information, right? Say I've got a level 3 burglar alarm at this location, and it might change the script a little bit, but it certainly is fully supportive of a manual process, right? So don't think this is all tied to only the fanciest of high-end systems, right? With thousands of dollars of equipment and a lot of technology in place. This is, we purposely made this standard so that it can be done using existing verification processes. And if I call the customer and they say, send the police, it'll put it in the category 3 or 2 or whatever we define, that score is appropriate. And the agent can communicate that to 911 or the public safety agency verbally. So So it's not a technology-based standard, right? Although analytics, you can see how they're going to play a big role in this if you have that information available. Some of it might be, by the way, internal stuff. I think it's going to look a lot like insurance, right? And their actuary tables. We'll be able to look at stuff like what type of location is it? Is it a commercial or is it a residence? What time of day is it? What are the, is a high crime area, right? All those types of things. It's not just what the video or the alarm system is telling us. There's going to be a lot of situational conditions that we think will tie into this score, right? That'll help an alarm company determine what is a higher level of confidence, more than just the customer or a piece of video telling us what's happening there, right? Although those things are certainly some of the highest weighted types of inputs that you can have. That makes sense to everyone. All right. And then this is my closing item related back to that 70% of calls going unanswered, right? A lot of your central stations that you use have probably started using anything from simple text messaging through more complicated methods like the use of apps, right, to send more information to the customers. I will tell you, even the text messaging is having a significant impact on that 70% answer rate. The level of engagement that we are seeing with just sending text messages as opposed to calls is tremendous, right? Because you can send it to everybody on a contact list at once versus kind of sequentially with phone calls. That what happens. When you're communicating with the customers that way, what we found, that just in a nutshell, is that we're seeing a 52% reduction internally, right, at ADT. I'm just going to share an ADT statistic. Since we started implementing our text messaging features, which sounds really simple, right? Sounds like something we should have done in the 90s, but it's been hard, right? And a lot of your central stations are probably the same way. But we've seen 52% reduction in false alarms, right? That's probably more impact than all of the other programs, right? ECV, CPO1, on test, right? Like all those types of things have barely made a dent in the number. And that's what our level one, call it our first cut at this, right? We haven't even enabled video. We haven't fine-tuned the interfaces much. Just by texting our customers, we have seen a huge increase in the amount of reductions in false alarm reports, right, and cancellations of our need to dispatch with the police departments. And it also, interestingly enough, right, like right now, if one of my agents is on a phone with a customer and they're saying, can you send the police? We have to hang up with them, right? Because that agent has to hang up or put them on hold in order to call the police now to do the notification. But with text messaging or this other information, that communication, whether even if I have the customer on the phone, we're implementing technologies, right, to shoot this stuff through to the police departments. So when you mentioned some of the partners, right, Intrado, RapidSOS, RapidDeploy, Carbine, there's a whole slew of companies that are acting as an intermediary between 911 and the citizen in this case, right? So Intrado's entire business has been built around routing 911 calls, so that when you're a mobile phone user or you have a VoIP phone, right, how does that phone call get to the right 911 center? Well, 70% of the time, like Intrado has told me, they're the behemoth in the industry, right? They have competitors like Motorola and some of these other startups, but they told me 90% of all 911 calls in the country, they touch, which is huge, right? And they're using that same technology now to help try to route phone calls to the, not just phone calls, but electronic information to the right agencies, right? RapidSOS, been in the news a lot. They're kind of doing the same thing. They've got a newer type of infrastructure put in place. RapidDeploy actually builds CAD systems, which are the dispatch centers or systems that they use for police, and they're trying to tie alarms into that. So I would tell you, while I don't call it out here, there's a huge change happening, right, with public safety, with the implementation of NG911, right? And there's an in-between period that we're going to have to deal with. One of the big things that's happening in their world is I think they just got approval for $15 billion of funding for 911, right, which is a huge thing. So that now a lot of these police agencies and 911 centers with outdated technology will be able to update their infrastructure, right? Because the government funding is hard to procure sometimes, but once it's there, they can start using it properly. So it's a big change that's happening in that world. And the public safety side is going to need us to change along with it, right? And will help support our customers. So our ability to gather information, send it to the public safety agencies in a meaningful format with appropriate information, it's a huge win, right? And I absolutely believe that that is going to be the baseline for security going forward, right? It's going to be hard to compete with a traditional alarm system when all this other stuff is happening, and you can send the information, keeps people safer, faster response, right? And the public safety side is going to be absolutely loving, right? the types of information that we can provide them. I often, I like to use these analogies. I like to ask ourselves, or myself sometimes, why is it that a 911 call where someone says, I heard a noise in my house, is treated at a higher priority level than one of our alarms, right? With the type of information we have on a modern alarm system, there should be no question that we should be able to provide way more information about what's happening there and make sure that our services are probably the desired way, right, for public safety to get the information. We could be sending, floor plans and locations of people, and you think about the firefighting life-saving efforts, right, that we can be implementing, even very simple things. I like to use this as an example. I talked to one of our fire chiefs, right, that kind of advises, get some input. And he's like, Tom, I would love it if you guys, like with your smart lights or something, like flash the porch light, right, when there's an alarm going on. He goes, because I can't tell you, and I sympathize, we've all probably been there. You use Google or Apple or something, you type in an address in the nav system, and you get close, it's dark. It's like, you're like, it's one of these three houses, right? But I'm not really sure which one it is. And they run into the same thing, right? And it's a very simple ask. And it's, from a alarm perspective, from a security company perspective, it seems like such an easy sell of a smart light bulb, right? At that point, it's just common sense. So I think there's a win-win-win here, right? Both for the customer, the citizen being protected, public safety, and the security industry. Like, I'm really passionate about where we're going with this, right? And how these technologies can be used. But happy to talk about that. ADS-01, the technology changes, our partnership with public safety, I think are all going to be very critical for the security industry over the next year or two. And I think we're all in a position to help, lead what this discussion looks like. It's a really exciting time. And I should not fail to mention that UL 827, right, which enables work from home. If you're part of a central station world, right, that standard just got approved, I believe, for permanent status versus the emergency COVID measures. These are the types of ways that we also have to adapt to the changing environments, right? So really exciting time. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about this stuff. And so I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I'll ask the first question. So as it pertains to the text messaging, how, I guess I understand the expediency and obviously, the fact that people aren't answering the phone. So how do you get the same level of information to and from the consumer that you would have gotten had you actually been speaking to them on the phone? Because things like passcodes and or the narrative of what's going on, I mean, I'll speak to myself. I don't type that well on my phone. So,
well, what we've done is there's two things. One is the very basic text message is you can convey a lot of information in it, right? You've only got a certain amount of characters, but you can convey there's an alarm at this location at this time. Call me for more information if you have nothing more than that, right? And that's a very important way of getting a customer to connect to the monitoring center. Okay. And cancel an alarm, right? It's fast and they read it, right? And even if it's your neighbors or your family members' location, you can just glance at it and see what's happening versus like someone's calling me, let me pick up and talk to them, or let me wait till I leave a voicemail and pick it up, right? It's very, very immediate, and you get to talk to a bunch of people all at once. That's just with basic text messaging. You can implement a more complex version of it, right? So I know we wanted to avoid talking a little bit too much about ADT, but we've got a version that kind of opens up a portal and it allows everybody inside of it to see what's happening, right? So instead of like calling an agent, which might be the default, you can click a button, right, that says cancel PD or send the PD, right? And you have a little information. It brings up more information, and it's actually got like a text message box where you can essentially chat with all the members of your call list.
So basically it's elevating it to more of an app level.
It
than
is.
your basic, okay.
But I would tell you, you know, philosophically, you're all familiar with this. Apps primarily are designed to manage the control panel, right? So when you have the app, you typically have access to cameras, to, you know, to zoning, to schedules if you're a business, all that kind of stuff. Well, that might not be what you want if you want to have your neighbor respond, right, to the list. So I've had my own internal battles where look, apps, you can build an app as a call list app, but I would tell you, if someone told me, hey, Tom, I added you to my burglar alarm, can you download this app? I'd probably like, no, really not interested in having another app, right, on my phone. But the text message just kind of comes through. And if you're really involved with the regulatory stuff, right, the way we've been able to, there's a lot of concerns about text messaging to cell phones, right, and violating some of the FCC rules, and the way our legal teams and most of them have kind of interpreted this is that this is part of the base service that a customer is paying for us, and we are in essence replacing our monitoring notification phone call with a text message, right? And so we have a lot of leeway in terms of sending it. Now it gets a little grayer where if you add your neighbor, well, there's going to be an implied permission that you've got your neighbor's permission right on our behalf for this kind of service you're paying us for. But in essence, right, we've seen incredible successes with this. I believe the other companies that have been doing this, some of the other third-party centrals, have also been seeing an incredible amount of success just with basic text messaging, right? So I'd encourage you, if you haven't looked at that for your customer base, to go look at it, because your customers are probably actually going to be a lot more receptive to this than they are to the phone calls.
Wow. So other questions? Who else has a question?
I get that. And I don't even really know if I have a question. Like, I get the whole texting idea, and getting the information from the customer possibly quicker. I guess my biggest thing is this something like with OnStar and how it gets the car information, and you know, it's a $40,000 car and I don't know what you pay for your monthly for OnStar, but is this something that can even be done with alarm systems? Is it realistic?
It is. That I would tell you, the basic text messaging thing has nothing to do with the alarm system at all. As long as someone has a smartphone or a phone capable of receiving text, right, and they provide it to you on a call list, that information, you can send text messages as opposed to making a phone call, right? Because they're getting notified one way or the other. It's just the text message is a lot more efficient, and it's easier, right? And it's probably a better, easier way to digest the information that's
Is it going to be able to move you up the list to get that police response though any quicker?
It does two things. One is it hits everybody at once, so it's not a sequential call, so that you get better false alarm reduction, right? So you're not calling the police as much, and B, if they send a confirmation that says send the police, right, versus like cancel the alarm, that automatically, we believe, puts you in kind of a tier 3, right? So that's our interpretation of it. Because it's kind of like, you don't know what's happening, but you have to assume there's an eyewitness at this point or something saying, maybe I know we're going to run into like, I don't know what's going on, but if someone physically says send the police, and there might be a flavor of that, send the police because I don't know what's happening, or send the police, there's definitely something happening, right? There's going to be a little, this is what I mean by fine tuning. We're literally just starting to navigate these waters, right? And what I just described to you is an internal conversation we're having about the types of buttons that we might create. The send the police, there's definitely something happening. No question, it's a tier 3, right? Send the police, I'm not sure, is probably a tier 1, right? Still, right. But with maybe puts it in the tier 2 because there's added degree of confidence that somebody's saying, I don't know what's happening, right? So that might be enough to elevate it to the tier 2. Although if we follow the definition that there's a person present, it probably doesn't meet that requirement.
Right. Thank you.
But that person present, by the way, could be the customer themselves. So we want the police to know that there's somebody there. And if we can tag that with this is someone friendly versus unknown, I think that's very important, right? These are the things that we'll be fine tuning in terms of the information that we send across and how often we have access to that data.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think Roy has a question.
Yeah, good morning. The question is, years ago we had something called Santa. Now we've got PSAP to ASAP. Now you've got Ppvar. How successful is this going to be, considering PSAP to ASAP or ASAP to PSAP, sorry, only has about 80 municipalities across the country after about 9 years that this has been in place. And Ppvar, I was originally on the committee with Keith Gentoff when this first started, 10, 12 years ago. How is this going to integrate with PSAP, or is it not going to integrate? Is this just another, service that just is not going to take off? And because there's so many different platforms, somebody may use dedicated micros, somebody might use Speako, somebody else may use Digital Watchdog, and so on. All these different platforms of video that all the police I know in my central station, we had a half a dozen servers to handle each different platform that somebody had.
For sure. So I'll divide that into a couple of areas, right? So ASAP to PSAP is the program you're talking about. I sit on their technology committee, right? I know Pam Petro and others were instrumental in helping to drive that into reality, right? It was called Project 36, even under CSAA, if I remember right. But they ASAP to PSAP is probably a great model that we would aspire to, because it communicates directly with that CAD system, right? So it takes an alarm event, puts it directly into their dispatch center. So there's no communications, no phone call whatsoever. It's available for that 911 dispatcher to process the information. The reason it only has 90 PSAPs after 10 years is there's a requirement built into it that says you have to index every single one of your customers, right, from the monitoring center to be an exact match to something inside of that CAD system. So it is a lot of labor, right, to map that across. And there's a cost to the PSAP, right? We don't see the cost, but the CAD platforms that implement it require the PSAP to upgrade to a certain level, and then there's a fee that they have to pay to be connected to ASAP, right? Which I only found out about myself recently. So it's not completely free. But I would tell you, Intrado, RapidDeploy, all those companies I mentioned, right? They're operating, they're experimenting. There's no business model for this quite yet. But Ring is one example that kind of providing information for free. We were just talking before, they're stumbling a little bit, right? So it's interesting to see, the privacy, the security, the police transparency, right? Like all the issues that they deal with, including with their app, right? They kind of navigate all these issues, and we're trying to learn from call it their forays into this space, right? Because they've been ultra aggressive about doing this. But the fact that they have thousands of police departments, I think it was 1,600 last time I saw, right? Already signed up for it, and more signing on, tells you how important it is and how desperate the police are for this information. So with ASAP, right, that's a mechanism of communication. The AVSO1 is a standard. I would say it's closer to ECV, right? You know that all of us probably follow some variation of ECV now, right? Like all of us attempt a verification call. So we think that AVSO1 is a standard that will adopt itself, right? Like police agencies will start using it, we'll find benefit to communicating with it. How that information communicates with them, whether verbally, which will just be pure AVSO1, or electronically, which is a replacement for ASAP to PSAP, that will make it ultra efficient, right? So I personally think they will work in parallel. ASAP to PSAP already has hooks inside of it where I can transmit like a confidence level, right? I can send hyperlinks and stuff to the police if they want to use it. But given its limited scale, we think that Intrado, RapidSOS, these other companies, they're going to be able to deploy it to thousands of PSAPs, right? Because they've already got the tools implemented to do that. So ASAP to PSAP communicates through an organization called Nlets, right? That's how they actually connect to the PSAPs. Intrado has its own connections, which are not limited in some ways, and the environment has changed quite honestly over the past 10 years. So I would tell you in a nutshell, the ability for us to communicate that information like ASAP to PSAP to the 911 centers is increasing exponentially, right? And those companies that I mentioned, along with some of the carriers, are already taking advantage of that. And some of the stuff like FirstNet actually allows first responders potentially to have an app that accesses that same information, right? So in a nutshell, I would tell you, Roy, that the environment has changed, the technologies have changed, and the way that this will be implemented is going to be at a scale that while a Houston, which uses ASAP to PSAP, might not change because they're seeing incredible efficiencies to that, we're going to see a lot of the thousands of other PSAPs that have the capabilities start taking advantage of these other mechanisms, right? Because they're not as labor intensive and they don't cost anything for the most part, I should say.
So there won't be any integration between Ppvr and ASAP at all, is what I'm hearing you say. At least not in the near future, unless the two organizations decide to finally communicate with each other and cooperate with each other.
Yeah, ASAP is a TMA sponsored technology, right? It's a standard that there's a ASAP to PSAP data communication standard, as well as the technology underlying it, right? And the data standard is what's ANSI certified, not the technology. So TMA has said, here is a standard for communication, which by the way, we're using, and has nothing to do with AVS-01. AVS-01 will add fields to that standard, right? To the ASAP to PSAP standard. And then whether or not we use the infrastructure that's been built by TMA riding on top of inlets or not, that's a whole different story, right? Because we can continue to call, the call never uses the infrastructure, but there's different ways of doing that. So Ppvr is an advocacy organization, right? So it's an industry group, very similar to SEAC. It brings together multiple groups of people. And what we're trying to do is advocate for the standard and the use of these technologies, and in particular around the importance of verification, right, to the whole process, because verifications kind of become like a default for everything that we do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, it's complicated.
Oh, I know. I've been involved in this for many years, and it's, like I said, cooperation is interesting.
It is. It's always interesting working. You guys are dealing with it all the time with volunteer organizations, lots of personalities involved, lots of viewpoints, but I think we're really moving in a very positive direction. And the changes that everything I talked about, I get super excited about, because ultimately I absolutely am confident this is going to save a lot of lives, right? It's really going to make a difference to people and to public safety.
Well, and that's the end result, and that's the goal is we're all doing this because we're supposed to be protecting things and keeping people safe. And as long as we keep that objective in mind, I think we can accomplish anything. It's when we get off that track where we have our challenges. So
yeah, and we have to acknowledge there's a lot of ways that we can go about doing this, right? And anyway, I'm super excited about the work we're doing. I would tell you, I mentioned Rob Baxter at the beginning. His company has flipped the false alarm statistic on its head. Now, I don't think any of us can follow his model. It's very involved with custom equipment and stuff. He literally has a 2% false alarm rate.
Wow.
Which is crazy, right? But part of their process is oriented toward captures, not deterrence, right? So a lot of his alarms are false. They're not false, they're silent, right? The agents are actually watching what's happening and reporting it like almost real time to the police. Their intent is to capture people, not necessarily to scare them away, right? And minimize the amount of time that they have. So it's a really interesting model, but it's kind of like, it tells me what can be done, right? If you got to kind of go to an extreme of this, but somewhere down that scale toward the middle, I think we can be doing a lot better in managing the amount of alarm traffic that's coming, because there's going to be a lot more of it, right? We know that there's more and more devices that are going to be connected. All of them are going to want some type of government response at some point, right? And unless we do something to help get a handle on that, we're going to be in a tough spot, right? The government agencies, public safety, have funding issues, they have staffing issues, just like everybody does. They have to kind of manage their resources, and there's going to be a crunch, right? And we want to be ahead of that and make sure we're sending them the information that they're looking for, so they want to respond to the alarms that we generate.
Well, the good news is the industry has the ability to fix the problem. It's just, do we have the determination to fix it? And I mean, we've been saying for a long time, either fix it or lose it. And the further we get down this road, there's no telling what could happen on the other end. And we all value our companies, you know, on the RMR. Well, what happens when nobody wants monitoring anymore because nobody's going to respond? And so, you know, we can fix it now or we can pay the price later. So I don't know. Is there any other questions? I think Carrie Ann was going to jump in there for a second. Or not.
I had to unmute myself. No, you are correct. But that was back at that point, you know, talking about the different alarm levels and utilizing, you know, he was stating the app, and essentially it's just coming down to verified alarms and how it is that some of the municipalities, which Akron is one of them, and how it is that they handle, you know, the alarms and having that verification person or camera or something.
So you're saying Akron already has a difference in how they respond to a verified alarm, or are implementing tools to accept like information that helps them verify the alarm?
No, they, so it's probably been 8 weeks. Oh, let's see. It's probably been 8 years at this juncture. They had a new police chief who is no longer with the city, but they had a new chief that implemented a policy within the police department, and a number of us had tried to fight it. But the way that they implemented it was that the police department policy was superseding what the ordinance was within the city on how alarms were to be handled. And part of that was with the verification, and he based his study and the changes for the city of Akron to mimic how the city of Las Vegas was handling their alarms, which all of us were questioning. We're like, that is not even a comparable thing. How he was going about it was just asinine, quite frankly. And the alarm industry, we all, you know, joined forces and try to fight it. And the amount of council meetings, residential, local community meetings with council members, contacting any of my contacts from the city of Akron, attending the daytime council meetings, evening, it was asinine. And they just let him go with it, and he's gone, but it's still not been questioned.
Well, I know that.
And I was working with a number of people from AT, as well as when Spectrum was really, you know, starting to get into the alarm industry. A number of us, we were working and trying to collaborate together, fighting it. And it was just, you know, we had SEAC involved. It was just.
I'm going to express a little bit of my personal philosophy here, right? But I think it's one that's interesting, right? So historically, we've taken a stance as an industry, right, that opposed a lot of the ordinances, especially those that have, you know, we have the model ordinance that SEAC has been espousing, and we typically ramp up for a campaign, right? Anytime we hear about a verified response or some other effort that's going on, and an extreme of that was Sandy Springs, right, where their ordinance fined the alarm companies, which is probably the worst case that we can see of any situation, right? Because we have very little control sometimes over what's happening. There's very little definition of what a false alarm is. But the city administrator that implemented the stuff at Sandy Springs moved over to a different city. I forgot which one it was, but we were able to kind of head that off. And we didn't head that off by necessarily a fight, right? Because if we look at why Sandy Springs implemented their ordinance, it wasn't punitive necessarily. It was because they were trying to get a handle on the false alarm stuff, right? I think when you talk to them, they had good intentions around it. It was just that the tools that they chose to use were terrible from our perspective, right, and unfair. But we talked eventually with the city council. We talked with the city administrators when they're available. We talked with them, right? And rather than I'd love for us to take a more of a partnership approach or a proactive one, right? Like lobbyists can make a big difference in this. I'm not a big fan of like the political stuff, but one of my counterparts that runs government affairs is incredible at this. And there's absolutely a mechanism and a process around getting politicians' attention, you know, like you've lived this, right? And we can, sometimes you have to fight, and sometimes you can, you know, literally just use politics to get the situation resolved. I'd love to see us get in a place where we have a very positive message. And I'm not sure where we stand with some of this. We think we can take some of the tools that I described and go to a Salt Lake City or maybe even a Las Vegas. We have some, they've changed their attitudes a little bit, right? And maybe we can get Las Vegas to back off of their verified response policy a little bit with say the right categories and scoring in place. The police departments we've talked to have been receptive to that idea, right? Including Salt Lake, which had a reputation for a while as being very anti-alarm industry, but that may or may not be where we're sitting right now. We want to see what ABS looks like. We need to give it a little bit of time to mature, right? And look at what those categories are. And then we can start addressing some of the more onerous ordinances that are out there, and maybe even revamp the work that's being done, right, by SEAC and others in terms of the messaging that we have. I'm excited about what this looks like, but I'm hoping it could be a more cooperative model, right, versus one where we gear up for a fight whenever we hear about an ordinance.
No, I agree. The unfortunate part is with the way that the city of Akron handled it, they called us on a day around 3 or 4 in the afternoon and said, oh, by the way, we're having a meeting for all security companies. It's tomorrow at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and we're implementing some things. If you can or can't make it, oh well. Then we get there, nobody had any idea, and they're like, this is what's happening, and this is happening in the next 30 days, and that's it.
Wow.
How this went about doing it themselves.
Yeah. Well, one of the missions that we'll have is to get ahead of that, right? We're going to use some of the treasury inside of Ppvr in conjunction with TMA to actively and with a formal plan, go after the public safety agencies and educate them about what we're doing, what it means to them, why they should be doing it, right? It should be, everybody's really excited about it. So I'm hoping that that message will get through, that will have the ability maybe to have a police chief. One of the police chiefs that I work with on Ppvr mentioned that when he was he's very active in South Florida. He was the deputy police chief of Miami. He was the public safety director of Hollywood and Coral Gables, I think. He, this gentleman, Frank Fernandez, was telling us that when he was the police chief, he tried to find organizations that can help, and he couldn't find anything online, right? Like he was like, how can I help address this? So whether it's SEAC, working with the mechanism that they have, whether it's Ppvr or TMA, we think we need to get the word out there that there are organizations that are that are in place to help with this, right? And we've had, I mean, you mentioned Santa, right? And there's FARA, right? There's IRIF, right? There's a lot of like legacy organizations that have been out there that kind of like, that were intended to work around false alarms and dealing with the issue, but have kind of, just kind of gone into the background a little bit, right? And I talked with some of the FARA people. I don't know. That's an interesting. They still have meetings in certain states. SEAC runs a lot of meetings with police chiefs and very active among law enforcement, and of course they're the shield of the security industry, right? Whenever an ordinance comes up, so very important role that they play. But I think we need a more of an advocacy organization, right? I think Ppvr fits that model, especially with the public safety membership that we have. I'll share something, right, that we haven't really publicized yet, but we intend, if we formalize this, you saw that the string of presidents that were Ppvr were all from the security industry. We fully intend the next one to be one of our board members from public safety. So public safety will literally be leading Ppvr, and then we're going to alternate past that, right, with terms of presidency, security industry, public safety, and alternate from that. Yeah, that's going to be significant. And so anyway, I'm hoping, like I said, I'm sharing a little bit out of turn there, but we hope that'll be formalized with our next board meeting.
All right. So we are a little bit past quarter past the hour. I want to make sure anybody that has a question gets a chance to ask it. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time as well, because everyone's got to have lunch and go back to work at some point here. So does anyone else have any questions for Tom? There's that sound of silence. So,
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate the
I-
presentation.
No, I really appreciate talking to you. I love talking about this stuff. I love the feedback and insights that all of you have. And believe me, as we kind of continue to develop this, happy to come back and talk. We'll happily communicate with your organizations about what's happening and keep you informed as we proceed, right? As we kind of close out this last quarter of the year, I expect to see a lot of what I'm talking about starting to solidify. ABS01 is probably going to go up for a formal vote very shortly, and they're just working on the final language of that. And Ppvr is working with TMA very closely on how we're going to partner together to advertise this, right? And we have a lot of ties with SEAC and other organizations, just as we're trying to formalize what our marketing plan is going to look like with public safety. So really excited that for the opportunity to talk. If any of you want to get involved or keep abreast of that, absolutely feel free. We're trying to be a little more active with our newsletters. We started a couple of newsletters inside of Ppvr that will be talking about what we're doing. Or if you want to join or participate, certainly welcome that also.
well, if there's anything that we can do here in Ohio, please let us know. We may be small, but we do try hard. So
Absolutely. I appreciate everything that you guys are doing and just the fact that you're so engaged. I love talking. So anyway, appreciate it. I'll let you go if you'd like. And you have a copy of my presentation. Happy to share
I
it.
do.
Recording. So
Thanks,
thank you
Tom.
again. Thank
all
you.
right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Dale.
Take care.